The true monsters are not found in nature, but rather in human minds. Goulden, William, The Mosquet King. Humanity has displayed an unsettling propensity for brutality throughout the worst periods of history. Even when we don't get anything from it, we are frequently aloof, self-centered, and, shockingly, harsh. According to a quote by John Stuart Mill, all that is necessary for people to accomplish their goals is for decent people to do nothing. Only a tiny fraction carry out the atrocity when a huge, moral catastrophe strikes, but the majority nearly always permits this minority to act silently. How frequently do major injustices occur merely because we choose to keep quiet or turn a blind eye? According to Tolstoy, the majority of us typically have a strong sense of right and wrong. This is due to the fact that we just conduct our lives in accordance with a basic sense of morality, rather than devoting our time to complicated philosophical or ethical quandaries. Screwtape, the seasoned demon in CS. Lewis's novel, Letters from a Devil to His Apprentice, claims that if this is true, which I doubt, it wouldn't be much of a disadvantage for demons. This book itself has one of the most illuminating examinations of this commonplace evil. The author explains how a devil might counsel a man to turn from God and virtue to immorality and brutality. Screwtape is accused of guiding the sufferer away from God and morality. He contends that while demons can't always persuade a human being that a particular moral argument is incorrect, they can nearly always make them feel as though it doesn't matter. In one way or another, rather than having a sound justification for our beliefs, we are frequently drawn to ideas because of their utility or dignity. Because of this, Screwtape counsels his nephew Wormwood to instill in his victim the notion that morality, God, and ethics are meaningless and too ethereal to be useful. According to Screwtape, the patient should never consider what is good or bad. Rather, they ought to concentrate on the pragmatic, on what is there in front of them. Wormwood should redirect the patient's thoughts back to something unimportant, such their lunch plans or their morning concerns, if they chance to start thinking about moral or religious matters. The goal is to encourage a general lack of interest in everything that has to do with values. Although people claim to have beliefs, in reality, these values are so divorced from their behavior that they are almost non-existent. The idea behind this and many other Screwtape devices is to make sure that people never get overly committed to a moral stance. Without realizing it, he eventually turns into a sort of moral nihilist. They don't have to totally give up on their moral principles. It's sufficient to constantly divert him from these principles, particularly when upholding them becomes tough. Here, the logic is straightforward. It is easy for other things to take precedence when worries about right and wrong diminish. Screwtape claims that this is very straightforward, since, deep down, we aren't particularly enthusiastic by strict value systems right away. This point interests me as I can relate to it at times. I like to think of myself, like most people, as someone who strives to be as nice as possible and has morals. Yet I can think of innumerable instances where I was far less kind than I might have been simply due to my emotional condition at the moment. I think this has a broader relevance, even though Lewis is primarily discussing how our worries about the worldly world might cause us to lose our relationship with God. We frequently let our ideals appear less tangible or just hypothetical, like a luxury we can set aside when reality hits us, even though we aren't aware of it. Even while those who reject God might not be afraid of the fires of hell, if they transgress their own morals, their conscience may suffer more than they could have ever imagined, changing them into something they are not. Lewis spends a lot of time discussing how a person's social group and surroundings may capture their mind and sentence them to damnation, despite the fact that Christianity often emphasizes free will and the sovereignty of the individual soul. The fact that Screwtape finds it acceptable that the patient spends time with his materialistic companion is one of his initial observations. Subsequently, the devils ensure that the patient associates with a group of high society intellectuals, also known as intelligent individuals. The man begins repeating what these new pals say because he naturally wants to impress them. He doesn't take an open stand. Instead, He merely nods or softens his position when they support a morally reprehensible attitude. At the end, Screwtape wants the patient to have a sort of dual identity, praying at church and considering himself a good Christian, but disliking these same values over dinner with his new social group. Demons benefit greatly from this mentality, which combines profound dishonesty with self-complacency. The patient's habits gradually stray from his values, and he starts acting in accordance with whatever is most practical at the time, without even recognizing it, until he realizes one day that he just knows what is now helpful and no longer understands what is right or wrong. He becomes a moral Machiavellian as a result. Furthermore, it's simple to push him toward violence because it's frequently more practical to be harsh than nice. According to Screwtape, frivolity, the inability to take any matter seriously, whether moral or not, is one of the most beneficial mental states a demon can instill in its victim. The patient must be forced to get so engrossed in irony that they lose sight of their convictions and become indifferent to the truth. Realizing that you're not necessarily secure just because you're around wonderful people is maybe the most unsettling thing. In this famous C.S. Lewis concept, pride is viewed as thinking too highly of oneself rather than as a single defect. This makes sense since demons consistently push their victims to foster division or selfishness through social ties in order to eventually undermine their principles. It causes him to despise individuals outside of his inner group rather than elevating the company of those he admires. He ultimately becomes divided by his high society pals, who turn him against himself and create an internal separation that mirrors the exterior one. Since we frequently turn to others for guidance on how to act, there is a compelling case to be selective about the people we spend time with, particularly if we become aware of how these individuals are progressively making us less compassionate and harsh. However, Lewis demonstrates that even friendships founded on morality may incite our worst tendencies if they are misdirected. He also emphasizes how the sense of superiority over others was and continues to be a major factor in several historical crimes, as well as numerous common injustices. People who possess moral self-sufficiency can carry out horrible deeds and still believe that they are doing something right or good. We might not even be aware of the extent to which we betray others and ourselves in the service of our erroneous notions of superiority. Because Letters from the Devil to His Nephew provide some insightful remarks regarding how we might deceive ourselves into thinking that we still uphold our morals, even after years of not doing so, I want to go deeper into this. Saint Augustine frequently discusses evil as a type of ignorance in the Confessions. He talks about how, in contrast to the spiritual grandeur he eventually discovered, his life prior to his conversion was filled with fleeting joys that prevented him from feeling truly fulfilled. This issue is particularly significant for Louis, who examines in his letters how imagination and illusion contribute to harshness and a rejection of virtue. The character Screwtape describes the three components of a human being: fantasy, intellect, and will, in one of his letters. A large portion of Screwtape's counsel is on making sure that the nasty, mean, and unpleasant rule a person's will, and that nothing nice ever leaves the realm of imagination. He must, for instance, have a lot of fantasies about doing good, such as seeing himself as a great spiritual leader or pledging to donate everything to charity when he passes away. However, these illusions must always be far off and ideally unachievable, but they must be sufficiently vivid to nearly appear real. An intricate fiction might be so realistic that it appears as though we have already accomplished our objective, which is the peril of imagination. However, Screwtape suggests that the victim be led toward negative emotions and animosity in the real world. Inflaming his pride is necessary to make his benevolence transactional rather than sincere. He must persuade himself of his superior intelligence while ignoring the views of others. Let him comfort himself by thinking that he has already done a great deal of good for the world, or that he will undoubtedly do so in the future, as Screwtape suggests, which, in contrast to the grandeur of his charitable illusions, is 1,000 Little Brutalities. This is a really diabolical genius move on the part of Screwtape. He understands that even when there is little proof of our inherent goodness in the outside world, we may immerse ourselves in ourselves and continue to believe in it. Screwtape wants us to believe that, despite our cruelty to others, we are mostly decent. Our moral illusions are so grandiose that they cause us to lose sight of the cruelty we engage in on a daily basis. It doesn't seem like it matters much now that we yelled at someone in a store or treated a buddy badly. According to this perspective, the concepts of good and evil are so far from the reality of our daily lives that they are practically theoretical. We overlook our lingering worldly terror because we lose sight of the ancient Greek notion that our virtues fundamentally show themselves. Because imaginations prevent the sufferer from thinking back on their past and comprehending what they are doing, this is ideal for demons. Rather, they use their imagination to fantasize when they are nice, and their intellect to justify when they are nasty. According to the devil's writings to his nephew, individuals frequently fall straight from moral self-sufficiency to despair after having an insight. For so long, they have thought of themselves as decent people that they can go to the other extreme when they find out that this isn't the case. They believe that it is preferable to rule in hell rather than serve in paradise, much like Satan did in Milton's Paradise Lost, and they start to believe that they are too lost to turn around. Thus, their only option is to accept their own brutality. Given that many philosophical studies of evil concentrate on horrific acts, Lewis' theory is innovative today. For instance, Albert Camus questioned how absurdity and the lack of purpose in life might cause individuals to adopt nihilistic ideologies or desperate acts, whereas Sigmund Freud studied how internal tensions and suppressed drives can result in harmful conduct. Lewis, however, is more concerned with a more familiar and commonplace form of evil, the cruelty that any of us are capable of engaging in, than with this. In an intriguing chapter, Screwtape highlights that everyone ends up in the same spot, regardless of whether they are sent to hell for a large number of minor transgressions or for spectacular acts. Lewis does this to remind us of something we frequently attempt to forget. The monsters that blaze the path of history are as real as our own small acts of cruelty. Therefore, we should question ourselves if we are as good as we believe we are, or do our wills engage in little sins on a daily basis as we permit our goodness to become something far more theoretical than practical. Nevertheless, Screwtape's final letter to Wormwood is rife with bitterness and rage, chastising Wormwood for allowing his victim's thoughts to escape his control. God is now protecting the victim, and nothing they do will get to her. Louis wants to make it clear that individuals are saved and able to withstand temptation because of God's grace. But even for non-believers, this provides enough of fuel for thought. First, Lewis argues that there is always time to modify one's path, or, to use secular terminology, to be saved. Realizing our everyday problems might be uncomfortable, but it's the first step to fixing them. By setting the conversation in the world of everlasting demons and hell, C.S. Lewis highlights the evil of common malevolence and raises the stakes for everyday kindness. Now that he is protected by God, man has not carried out any of the heroic exploits that he was urged to dream of. Instead, he attempts to be a decent person in the everyday sense, praying for his daily sustenance and the fortitude to be good for the next few hours. He is now a wonderful blend of purity and normalcy. Previously, he reflected all of the small cruelties we come across every day. He is now a symbol of common kindness. It's the stranger who stops to inquire about your well-being on the street, or the one who hands you their old metro ticket. The way to paradise is shown as a collection of modest virtues, just like the road to hell is a sequence of little transgressions. Lewis ends on a really positive note, in my opinion, and it serves as the ideal juxtaposition to the previous examination of the effects of common evil. There is no denying that Lewis's account of daily virtue heavily relies on God. This raises the question of what it takes to withstand the lure of darkness and to remain steadfast when confronted with external influences that drive us in the direction of the monstrous. Personal accountability holds the key to the solution. This leads us to the unsettling reality that Lewis highlights. The seeds of both good and evil are buried deep inside each of us. We are living paradoxes with the capacity for both great acts of bravery and extreme brutality. Making the decision between these two extremes is a continuous process. It is a daily conflict, a never-ending struggle. Lewis urges us to acknowledge this dichotomy inside ourselves, to see that the capacity for evil exists within every one of us, not only in some far-off place or monster. According to Carl Jung, when we comprehend this duality and acknowledge that we are capable of both good and evil, we are better equipped to guide our behavior and make choices that are consistent with our actual nature. We become more awake and better individuals as a result of this knowledge, enabling us to behave with purpose rather than letting external factors pull us along. It's critical to realize that the distinction between right and wrong is a practical, everyday reality rather than only a philosophical idea. Here's the specifics, though. Being aware of and comprehending this implies that you possess a power that many others lack. You're not just another face in the throng, mindlessly obeying commands or giving in to environmental forces. You understand the things that may turn you in a negative direction, and that knowledge entails accountability. Since it's ultimately about actively choosing the good rather than only avoiding evil, being aware of these influences equips you with the means to resist. However, we must realize that choosing between right and wrong is a succession of tiny, everyday choices rather than a major, one-time event. You oppose the forces that want to change you into someone you are not every time you stand up for what is right, defy peer pressure, and choose to recognize the humanity in others. Although it's difficult and not always obvious, it's essential. It is obvious that the author does not want it to be simple. There are instances of people deceiving themselves into believing they are showing love throughout the letters when, in reality, all they desire is possession or the boost of their own ego. Lewis believes that cultivating a sincere and ongoing concern for other people is a difficult but worthwhile endeavor. This might be done for the benefits in a future life if you're religious, or it could just be done to promote peace, kindness, and tranquility in this world if you're not. Finally, C.S. Lewis cautions us about the brittleness of human morality and how easy we might veer from the straight and narrow by committing little, nearly undetectable daily injustices. He reminds us that our illusions and the way we employ fantasy to make ourselves feel better than our actions demonstrate are the true threats. The distinction between right and wrong is not a far-off concept. It permeates our daily choices and dispositions, forming who we are, via tiny acts of true kindness that, when combined together, have the ability to influence both ourselves and the world around us. Lewis urges us to confront this inherent dichotomy and to continuously devote ourselves to good, not via lofty heroic gestures or unachievable ideals.